We do have what's known as a single exit pricing strategy, which requires pharmaceutical manufacturers to set a price which they're not able to exceed. They could really only drop down from that price. So pricing is addressed in our current system. And the policy goes on to propose that there be an enhancement of our health infrastructure, again, not a hard IP issue or an IP issue at all, and that there should be an increase of public funding on research on South African-related health issues. I guess the most important of these would be tuberculosis. I think it's the #1 killer in South Africa at the moment, something that's, in fact, quite easily dealt with in many other countries. And the problem, to me, it's not only a medicine problem, it's a compliance problem, patient compliance. So again, a noble intention, I think, being expressed, but not necessarily a hard IP issue. And so, again, not to want to sound negative, but not that these concerns are necessarily mine. These are concerns that have been expressed in the industry and in South Africa regarding this policy. Is, for example, that there's been no data or empirical support for the proposals. For example, the statement is made that patents are restricting access to healthcare. It's a statement, but not supported necessarily. So it's a feeling of somebody. And really, if you want to make that kind of sweeping statement, you should possibly want to support it. There's also no time frame or cost estimates for implementing the system. There's been no risk assessment in relation to the effects on the local economy or external commercial ties. So, for example, how would our bilateral trade agreements be affected? Would it crush investment or industry? I think for me, maybe a more important issue is that we have limited resources and infrastructure for specifically an examination system. The current system is groaning as it is. So even as a registration system, it's not. I wouldn't say it's bad, but it's not the most effective. Now add examination on top of that, and we might not have a system that works well at all. I guess you could also say that if it's not going to work effectively, then what would be the point of it? You might add delays to patents or the grant of patents, and those delays in themselves might create uncertainty, which is not necessarily beneficial to the entry of a generic on the market in any event. And there are proposals that the policy is possibly at odds with our TRIPS requirements, and I guess you would have to weigh that up and look at the specifics, but there's not specifically related to compulsory licensing issues. But again, you'd only be able to tell that once you had an actual some draft legislation to look at. But having said all of that, for me, it's exciting times. It's an exciting time in South Africa. There are probably opportunities for generic players to enter the market that didn't exist before. It looks like the government's attitude is one of encouraging the entry of generics, so that they might not have had put the nuts and bolts nicely in place, but there certainly seems to be some kind of will to do that. And it's going to be interesting to see how it's put together. In fact, I recently learned that our patent office is pressing ahead with the appointment of examiners who are to be trained by the Chinese patent office. So despite the fact that our law hasn't been changed, there is provision for the registrar to exercise some kind of examination, and I think they're going to be relying on it. So there seems to be a will to push it forward, and that something's going to change. And then just briefly, the flip side of my optimism is recent case law. I don't think this case law really helps us, and I think it's a result of not having or having lost all our patent experience on our court's benches. The first one that I think is important relates to divisional applications. Our Supreme Court of Appeal recently said that it's quite in order for a patentee to file a divisional which has essentially coterminous but broader claims than the parent application. That could be used quite effectively by patentees. I'm thinking you can have, I guess now, as many bites at the apple as you want, provided your claims aren't exactly the same. And then the second relates to interim interdicts or interim injunctions. These have been dumbed down severely, whereas there were a list of requirements that a patentee would be asked to fulfill before the grant of an interim injunction. It's now been reduced, it seems, to the balance of convenience. So who would it be more convenient to keep out, the generic, or would it be more convenient to have the originator keep the market share? And that question is a no-brainer, I guess. Of course, the originator who's been in the market for 5, 10, 15 years would be more inconvenienced than the generic who's entered 2 months or 6 months ago. So that's not very positive, and I think that would increase difficulty of generic entry at this stage. And to me, it's completely at odds. These decisions are completely at odds with the public sentiment expressed in the IP, this draft IP policy. So you have our government expressing a view that I think you should be encouraging, or not encouraging, but at least not taking a necessarily hardline stance on interpretation of certain aspects, and in fact the courts are taking, I think, an excessively hard. So for example, this interim interdicting decision, I just don't think the judge even looked at the established case law. But that's our position at the moment. So I'm going to make up for the 20 seconds that we exceeded, and I'm finished. Thank you.